Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. My name is Matthew Porcelli. I am the North American chair of the ISRM. I also, amongst other things, am partnering with Satya Rai for this ISRM fellow to fellow fireside chat / virtual passion get to know you session about why we are passionate about what we do in strategic risk and crisis management. I am more than happy and very honored to be in the presence of two amazing young ladies here, Amina Ahmed and Professor Alison Wakefield. I got that right? Or is it a doctor?
That's right.
Okay.
Both, Professor.
Doctor. I know in the U.S. it could be a different Dr. Alison Wakefield, also who was a fellow Life Safety Alliance top 40 along with me. So I'm also fully privileged to have you with us. And we're in a very crucial month. We were actually just talking on this call about the day after tomorrow being 9/11. And I think it's very appropriate, not only that it is, it's not just U.S. centric, but it's felt around the world. But before we get into that, I'd like to first have our panelists here introduce themselves. So Amina, please just briefly take us away. Oh, you're on.
Okay, that was my first fail. Apologies. Hi, my name is Amina Ahmed, and I currently work at IPSA, so that's the International Professional Security Association, as the director of EDI and belonging. So before that, I worked in policing for over 15 years, so quite a long time. Just to give you a bit of a context about my background, so born and bred in the UK. As you can tell by my name, I am Pakistani Muslim. And I graduated from university with a degree in sociology and psychology. And then shortly after that, started my career in the Metropolitan Police Service. Started at the bottom of the ranks, actually, in reference and vetting, was essentially doing background checks on people applying to be teachers and doctors and etc. And then I sort of worked my way up the career ladder and found myself in counterterrorism policing for 5 years, actually. My role there was as a performance analyst, so collating sort of performance reports around different capability areas like investigations, intelligence, counterterrorism borders and prevent across the board, essentially. And then I was promoted again into London's counterterrorism policing command as the senior performance analyst. So I spent quite a bit of time analysing data, analysing investigations, and also managing a process called the disruptions process to sort of assess the impact of policing interventions on counterterrorism risk, so extremism and terrorism threats. So that's a bit about my background. I'm also really, really passionate about leveraging and empowering sort of underrepresented groups. I'm a firm believer in early intervention, supporting young people to prevent them from going down the wrong path. So that's a little bit about my background and what I do. So nice to meet you guys.
Thank you, Amina. Very, very impressive. That's all. And thank you for your service as well. A lot of people think it's thank you for your service is just for the military, which I say that globally, but also since we're cousins, the U.S. and the UK. That's why, that's why I love the relationship the U.S. and the UK have together. I always say thank you for law enforcement and the military, no matter what side of the pond we're on. So thank you for that and welcome. Dr. Alison Wakefield, somebody who really doesn't need an introduction. Please, my friend, the floor is yours.
Oh, that's very kind. I will definitely need an introduction to some viewers. So I'm a professor at the University of West London, and my career has been in criminology, and from there getting into security studies, security management. And so from being an educator and researcher, I've become involved in the professional community. That culminated in my chairing the Security Institute, which is a UK-based professional association from 2018 to 2020. So that was wonderful. Since I've finished that role, I've had a bit more time and space to get involved with other associations. So I'm spreading myself around those organizations a bit more, which is a wonderful opportunity to expand my horizons. So since then, I've been doing more work around excuse me, more work around cybersecurity. And that's included some recent research for ASIS on autonomous vehicles. And then resilience as well. So initially around national resilience and increasingly into organizational resilience. And so these days I think about counterterrorism in that broader resilience context. And there's some interesting dimensions there for how we think about terrorism and counterterrorism within that wider context. And that links particularly well with the interests of IPSRM members who do look beyond security, which is one of the exciting things about the organisation, is that understanding where security sits within that broader risk and resilience framework.
No, well said, Alison. And for my demographic, I'm a frontline security manager, and a lot of individuals, actually not as many, because I think we've pretty much got the message out now more than ever post 9/11 that the frontline security officer is just as important as the intelligence analyst or the chief security officer, chief risk officer. And Amina, you had mentioned you had worked with the Met. There's just as much that collaboration between the public and the private partnerships. And also, too, Dr. David Rubens, I will use one of your words, pracademic, with Alison. There are practitioners and there's, hence myself, and the academics, hence Alison, which we work together to sharpen our acumen to deter not only criminal, but terroristic activity. And, I'm looking, again, I think, it's interesting, no matter how many years has gone by, everybody says we all know where we are when September 11th happened. I mean, I live in New Jersey, which is not too far. Where I sit currently in Jersey City, New Jersey, I can literally see where the towers were struck. And actually to the point where the glass was shattered on one of the buildings that in New Jersey that felt the shockwave. Now, since we have this collaboration with the United Kingdom, hence, my friends on this fireside chat / podcast, Amina, do you feel that there's been a huge? I mean, I know all of us as practitioners and strategists. Do you feel have you seen a dramatic shift since 9/11? Has it really woken us up? I mean, now even over 2 decades later, have you seen a big shift in what we should be doing as far as deterrence?
I would say that it definitely has, and I think 9/11 sort of spurred off like the kind of onset of all of that deterrence, all of those deterrence measures. But and I think as time has gone on, and particularly with the sort of increase in social media and globalization of information and data being so readily accessible to everyone, that has sort of perpetuated again and sort of exacerbated the whole sort of importance of being on top of counterterrorism and extremism risk across the globe. But in addition to that, what I would say is that the threat of extremism and terrorism has also expanded into so many various arenas, which is also quite concerning. So, back around sort of 9/11 time, I think the primary risk at that point was, of course, Islamist-related extremism and terrorism, whereas now that's sort of expanded into right-wing extremism and terrorism, and then we've got the MSyl movement as well, and there seems to be sort of influx in sort of extremist ideology across the board, which is quite concerning because I find that as society is becoming more accepting and more liberal and more tolerant of and welcoming of diversity and inclusion, there's also been a sort of counter sort of dynamic, whereby there are a group of individuals who are feel threatened by that and essentially feel that they need to overcompensate because of the sort of increase in diversity and inclusion by becoming more extreme in their ideologies and beliefs. So, yeah, I do find that there is that shift. But yeah, and because of that, of course, terrorism and extremism has become a really, really crucial top priority. But in terms of how it's dealt with and how it's managed, I do think that it's a lot more complex than it than it sounds. So.
Yeah, and Amina, you actually said the key word there, complex. And actually, this is where I'm going to follow up with Alison as the teacher in the group. Actually, I guess in a sense, we're all teachers. But as the doctor here, the PhD, I found that, it's sickening how everybody hears terrorism. Everybody thinks, I mean, it's all, they think it's a foreign item. They don't even think about, it's not. There is domestic terrorism too.
Mm-hmm.
You have extremism, homegrown extremism too. It doesn't necessarily have to be of a specific race. It doesn't have to be of a specific. It can be, and again, it's so troubling. I don't even want to discuss it.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is that, and I think you're right. I mean, I think that there is, we're opening up to it, that an acceptance, but. Again, as an academic standpoint, Alison, maybe you can shed some light on this. Is there any research, at least that have you come across, that shows that society's been more tolerant of this? Like, is there any kind of, again, I don't know whether any projects have been even put out saying that there has been less focus on let's say, unfair judgment of individuals based on, race, color, creed, and so forth, rather than the objective. And again, forgive me, it's coming out kind of mishmash. It's just that it's a very sensitive topic to talk about. I just noticed that there's a lot of ignorance. There still is a lot of ignorance out there. And as you were an academic, I figure you could enlighten us a little bit. And then you could yell at me when I see you in Orlando about giving you a question that sounded like I didn't have enough caffeine this morning. So please continue.
Yes. So we're going to meet next week. No, 2 weeks from now.
2 weeks, yeah.
In Florida for an ACES conference, which is very exciting. I think for now, in a time of this troubling division, it's important to think about the big picture, about where the way that's playing out in our countries compare with what's happening in other countries, and not to think about it in a silo, see the bigger picture, and also not to think of terrorism in a silo. So I've been reading the global trends reports of the National Intelligence Council in the US and the Ministry of Defence in the UK for quite a few years now. And there, in both countries, there have been multiple iterations of those reports, and there are equivalent ones by other countries and intergovernmental bodies. So there's quite a bit out there. So it's interesting to see what sort of forecasting is taking place, and the way that these kinds of trends are being discussed, because it gives you that bigger picture, that chance to step back a bit and sort of see how that's featuring within the way, in terms of the way that society is changing. I think, unfortunately, that Isaac Newton quote, that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, we're seeing that played out. So we see politics bouncing from one side to the other, and it's not constructive, and you can get so swept up in that, which then leads on to discussions about radicalization. We all need to be mindful of how much time we're spending online and not getting sucked into some of these issues, because there's some very concerning things that tap into all of our challenges and insecurities. So to kind of see where tensions exist in multiple countries. If you think about anti-globalization movements over the last few decades, that was initially something that was on the left. The movements were on the left, And they were really about inequalities in a global stage that were disadvantaging workers and residents of global South countries, or global majority countries, or developing countries. There's different language that's used for those kind of countries versus the West or the North. We're now seeing more right-wing type protests. And really, that's identified as being linked to sort of the unequal distribution of the benefits of globalization within one's own country, not that international picture. So city dwellers and middle-class people may be benefiting more from that connectivity and have the social mobility or have that more kind of international, I guess, identity. Others aren't getting that. And in the UK, for example, regional imbalances have been neglected by successive governments ever since I was a social science student in the last century. That was pointed to as a source of massive inequality, and we haven't seen much to address that. Where that's playing out in the US or the UK versus other countries, particularly Western countries, where the same sort of dynamics apply, we're just seeing a different flavour of this. I think we can take the heat out of it a bit if we do think about these broader trends. So you use the term complexity. Complexity thinking is an interdisciplinary approach, sometimes called complexity theory, but there's not a testable theory as such. It's more about recognizing that lots of the issues that are never solved are complex, and they're complex for certain reasons, like there's no single cause, and different entities have a stake in it. There's no single solution, and there are kind of competing trajectories, and we don't know how issues are going to play out. And so when you deal with issues that are complex, you need to adapt your working practices in accordance with that. They need to be transparent, collaborative, data-driven, and flexible in design and execution, so that you can adapt to a changing context. And of course, we know that in short political cycles that are characteristic of democratic countries, it's really difficult to take a long-term view. There's always this short-termism of governments that doesn't help. There's great work that goes on in governments, but you don't really hear about that in the news. You learn about it through our professional communities, and you understand some of the background activities and strategies that are in place. So that's interesting to look at. And then we just have really different ways in which we organize our structures and strategies as well. And I started to empathize a little bit more with America when I went to live in Australia, and just realized what it was like to live in such a large country as opposed to a minuscule country in terms of its size that the UK is.
It's not minuscule. It's like when people think New Jersey's part of New York, and it's not. Yeah, but every time I say I'm from New Jersey, you mean New York? No, New Jersey is its own state.
Yeah. Well, we're densely populated, and you can normally get to anywhere within about 5 hours. The way that we structure our national security and national resilience frameworks obviously has to be is responding to the particular issues associated with each country, its structure, its size, its culture. So in a book that I published 3 years ago called Security and Crime, Obviously, there's so much that you can say. I had to put some parameters around it. So it's primarily a kind of UK and US perspective in the book, but then trying to set that in a wider context. And so I did some comparison around how our system in the UK it is structured, particularly in response to counterterrorism, and how that compares with the US. We both took measures that recognized terrorism within a broader range of security risks. So in the UK, we had something called the Civil Contingencies Act, and that set up a framework that would contain any major ongoing threat, whether it be a heightened terrorist risk or a pandemic or anything else. We have something called a lead department model. So the central government department that's deemed the expert in that particular area takes the strategic lead. Our cabinet office, which is a government department that supports the Prime Minister and the cabinet, they do a lot of the strategic work. And then that's the model that we use. So the structures that we have account for different types of risk. We do have the more kind of hardcore or traditional security side, including all of the work that we don't know so much about, where police and intelligence services are working below the surface, really, to identify and pursue offenders. But there's that resilient side as well.
No, but thank you. Actually, that was a good segue into this question I was going to ask Amina too. As far as and thank you again, Alison, very much for that. Amina, do you feel that there's a saying, at least I go by, is that it takes a crisis to really get us moving? Not us as much, but those we protect. Do you think, it takes a 9/11 or a serious incident to get, let's say, the clients, the people we protect, whomever, when you were in law enforcement or even, now, do you feel that society or, the C-suite, let's just say, is more reactive rather than proactive?
Absolutely. So when the recent riots took place, of course, the right-wing sort of EDL riots took place. Of course, there was a lot of shock and disarray across the UK. But the first thing I thought, the first thought I had was, well, unfortunately, based on my experiences working in counterterrorism, and that was actually a couple of years ago. It wasn't even quite recently. Back then, being an analyst, having analysed data sets around threat, looking at intel and investigations, the trajectory of right-wing extremism was going up rather than going down, and also the threat level itself was also going up, and also the capability in itself, but. There are a couple of variables that impact on society's inability to sort of understand that those sort of patterns and thematics, and that's based on media, the mainstream media, social media. There's so many, education, so many variables out there that impact the way the public perceives threat. And like I said, because I was already aware of the trajectory of right-wing extremism and threat, it wasn't a shock or a surprise to me that, that the EDL riots happened. But what I can take from that is, I think we are great at offering short-term solutions, impactive measures, pursue tactics. But when it comes to, I do genuinely believe that, we need to also focus efforts on long-term solutions as well. And having a better understanding of those sort of complex issues such as disproportionality, systemic inequalities across public and private sector. I remember, again, because I used to do quite a lot of analysis, produce analytical products for seniors and for board meetings. There was quite a bit of data that showcased the fact that there were major correlations with the level of threat in a certain region and things like, issues such as disproportionality, issues such as deprivation levels, many factors that would increase the chances of individuals being drawn into extremism. So being mindful of that, I do genuinely believe that society does need to change, become, I guess, more strategic in the way that it manages extremism, have a more of a long-term approach rather than tackling things short-term, because sometimes that can have an adverse effect, actually. Like I said, there's so many variables that impact on public's perception and how organizations, public and private sector bodies respond to threat, and those factors are disproportionality, media, social media, of course, so for example, because I do a lot of work with Black Police Association, being a member, and as an example, Black boys are significantly more likely to be strip searched than white boys. And even within policing itself, Black and Asian colleagues are 4 times more likely to be issued with misconducts and dismissed from the force than their white colleagues. So that's just an example of how disproportionality can exist even within an organization that is supposed to counter threats and protect society, our diverse society. So it's all of those variables that we need to take into account when, and I think, we need to think a lot more long-term and a lot more strategic in how we deal with threat and manage threat. So that's my take on it.
Linked to that, it kind of highlights the difference between absolute poverty, for example, and relative deprivation. And in a world of 24/7 media, everyone can see what everyone else has more than ever before, and so we'll always be conscious of those inequalities. So that's always going to be there, shining a light on the kinds of things that will lead people to perhaps go against the state.
Lack of ignorance, right? Forgive me for interrupting, but it's just like, lack of, there's too much ignorance, quite frankly. This stuff has to be brought to light. But go ahead, Alison. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, that's okay. I mean, I think we could talk at length around this. And there's the dimension of corporate social responsibility that perhaps offers a space to be thinking about these factors a little bit more and draw out why it might be relevant to people in executive roles in industry, how they can have a positive impact. I mean, that feeds into education potentially. So I'm in a university that has a far above average proportion of students who come from some of the poorest areas in the UK. We have an index called the indices of deprivation, so we know where students are coming from. So we know that we have the sorts of students that are underrepresented.
Actually, Alison, not to cut you off, I apologize. We actually have reached the end. This actually can merit definitely part 2. I'm going to quote you both on that, or hold you that. Amina, Alison, thank you so much again. This is IPSRM Fellow to Fellow episode 3. Yes. I'm going back in time. Again, thank you all. Be safe. And if you're at GSX in Orlando, please come by the IPSRM North American Hub Mixer on Wednesday, September 23rd at 4 p.m.